Most people start a new year with what Seneca would call counterfeit resolve, convinced this is finally the year where everything changes. Then, like clockwork, weeks later, they're back in the same scrolling habits, the same attentional poverty, the same cycle of wasted potential. This is the exact framework people use to regain control over their attention, rebuild delayed gratification, and actually follow through on their goals. But I will warn you now, skipping even one step is why most dopamine detox attempts fail and why people end up right back to where they all started. All solutions really start by understanding the problem better. So, what really is the problem then? Why are we perpetually reaching for stimulation? What Blaise Pascal observed centuries ago remains absolutely true. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Except now, we have engineered thousands of ways to ensure we never have to do that. To understand the problem, let's ask a more fundamental question. What is dopamine? Let's talk about dopamine, but not in the oversimplified version that you've probably heard. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger in your brain. And here's a key insight from neuroscience research. Dopamine isn't actually the pleasure chemical. According to research by neuroscientist Ken Berridge at the University of Michigan, dopamine is more accurately described as the motivation or wanting chemical. It is what drives you to pursue rewards, not necessarily what makes you enjoy them. Think of dopamine as your brain's motivation currency. When you anticipate something rewarding, for example, food, social validation, entertainment, achievement, your brain releases dopamine. This basically creates desire and drives action. Here's really where it gets interesting. Your brain evolved this system in an environment of scarcity. In our ancestral past, dopamine motivated essential behaviors like finding food, forming relationships, exploring new territories, stuff like that. These activities required effort and the dopamine payoff had to be earned. But today, we live in what research call an abstinogenic environment, and I'm not just talking about food. We've essentially created a Las Vegas for your attention. Everything engineered for maximum compulsion and minimum effort. The house always wins, and your focus is actually the currency. We're surrounded by engineered sources of easy dopamine, for example, social media, notifications, video games, streaming services, junk food, you name it, it's probably there. As neuroscientist Andrew Huberman from Stanford explains, these modern stimuli provide dopamine hits with absolutely minimum effort, and critically, they do so in a very unpredictable fashion, which actually makes them more exciting and more addictive. Let me be clear with you, there's no such thing as good or bad dopamine molecule. Dopamine is just dopamine. But there are definitely high value and low value dopamine loops. Low effort, high frequency loops include scrolling social media, checking notifications, binge watching shows, eating processed foods. What they do is, these give you quick dopamine hits but lead nowhere. They're actually what Cal Newport in his book Deep Work calls shallow work, activities that don't produce meaningful outcomes. High effort, high value loops, on the other hand, include deep work sessions, exercise, learning new skills, building relationships, and possibly creating something more meaningful. This is what you would consider as deep work sessions with meaningful outcomes. Now, these require significant effort upfront, but generate lasting satisfaction and actual progress towards your goals. Here's the problem though. When you constantly engage with low effort dopamine sources, your brain recalibrates. Research on dopamine receptor downregulation suggests that frequent overstimulation can reduce your sensitivity to dopamine over time. Translation, if you will, it's basically the meaningful stuff starts feeling even harder while the easy stuff becomes even more appealing. This is basically why you can focus on your work but can easily watch YouTube videos for hours. Your motivation system in some sense has become reconditioned. This is also why you like the idea of doing the work and talking about the work more than actually doing the work. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, mental masturbation. That's the term colloquially used these days. It's basically the dopamine hit from imagining success without the friction of actual execution. You're essentially giving yourself credit for work that you haven't done. So, what's the solution? Despite what the term suggests, you can't actually detox from dopamine. Your brain produces it naturally and you need it to function. That's how it works. However, What you can do is strategically reduce overstimulation to resensitize your reward system and break unhelpful habit loops. Think of all this as a reset, not a permanent lifestyle change. The protocol I'm about to share with you is designed for focused bursts of deep work, periods where you intentionally reduce easy dopamine sources to make space for meaningful productivity. Then, you of course return to your normal life, but with better awareness and habits, something that you can carry along the way. This approach is basically inspired by Cal Newport's concept of productive meditation and the science of habit formation from researchers like Wendy Wood at USC. So don't shoot the messenger here. What I'm about to share isn't sexy or in some sense revolutionary, it's just effective. Let's get into the 5-step protocol. Fair warning though, I have to tell you this, each step builds on the last one. Skip one and you're building a house of cards. So without further ado, let's get into the protocol. Step 1, environment engineering. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, has a powerful principle. Make good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible, or at least a tad bit harder. So what you want to do is this. During your focus periods, engineer your environment to remove easy dopamine sources, some of which may include put your phone in another room, not just face it on your desk. Use website blockers like Freedom or Cold Turkey. I'll have some linked in the description just in case you wanted them. The next one is clear your workspace of distractions, and if possible, work in a dedicated focus space where your mind and your brain is engineered to work. Research from Princeton neuroscientists found that physical clutter competes for your attention and reduces your ability to focus. A clean and minimal environment isn't just aesthetic, it's actually quite functional. The key here is friction. Every barrier you create between you and distraction is a decision you don't have to make with willpower alone. Here's the principle. Architect your environment like you're designing for your worst self, not your best self. Because at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, when willpower is depleted, your environment will make decisions for you. You're basically at the mercy of your willpower and you're probably on autopilot. So, as Marshall McLuhan puts it, we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. Make sure you're shaping them wisely. Step 2 is clarify what really matters. This is where I personally believe where most people fail. They eliminate distractions without knowing what they're making space for. Before starting your focus period, get crystal clear on your high value activities. Calport recommends what he calls deep work, cognitively demanding tasks that create value and are hard to replicate. This is essentially the definition of deep work that Cal Newport has put down. So ask yourself this, what would make the biggest difference in my work or life if I completed it? Or perhaps, what activity, if I did it regularly, would compound into significant results? And what I want you to do with all these questions is write these down. Be very specific, not work on my business, but write the first draft of my sales page. Or code the user authentication feature. Be very specific. That's essentially the goal. It's to get clarity on what you're making space for. According to research on implementation intentions by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer, people who specify exactly when, where, and how they'll do something are 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people fail dopamine detoxes not because they lack discipline, but personally, I think it's because they lack direction. They're using abstinence as some sort of procrastination tool, avoiding the hard question of what they should actually be doing. As Nietzsche wrote, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Find your why first, then the detox actually becomes a tool, not a punishment. Bringing us to step 3 of this protocol, reconfigure your reward system. Here's a counterintuitive insight from behavioral psychology. To build motivation for difficult tasks, you need to reward yourself for doing them. This isn't about external rewards like buying yourself something. It not necessarily has to be just that. It's about consciously creating positive associations to doing more difficult tasks. After completing a deep work session, here are some suggestions. Take a moment to acknowledge what you've accomplished. That's definitely a start. Then you could probably notice how you feel, the satisfaction, the progress, and the capability of actually putting yourself through deep work sessions. Acknowledge that. Do something genuinely enjoyable, perhaps after a walk, calling a friend, having good coffee. So I think you get the point. Rewarding yourself not necessarily has to be one or the other. Pick one and keep moving. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine is released not just from rewards, but from the anticipation of that reward. By consistently pairing deep work with some sort of positive reinforcements and positive outcome, or even rewards in this sense, you basically train your brain to release dopamine in anticipation of focus sessions, because at the end of that, you're basically expecting a reward off of it. Over time, the hard work itself becomes rewarding because you slowly start seeing progress in the deep work sessions that you've done. This is how professionals in most fields or in any field develop what Mihaly calls flow states, where challenging work becomes intrinsically more motivating. Look, I'm going to level set with you. I'm very pragmatic about this. I never start anything challenging without a reward waiting at the finish line. And yes, sometimes that reward is materialistic. Maybe it's a nice dinner, maybe it's a nice book, maybe it's just guilt-free time doing absolutely nothing. So pick your battle, pick your rewards, and keep marching. I mean, I guess the Stoics might judge me, but even they understood that we're not purely rational beings. We're motivated by pleasure and pain. So I guess use that, just don't bankrupt yourself in the process. Bringing us to step 4, live with intention and consciousness and some conscientiousness. This step is about developing what psychologists call metacognition, awareness of your own thought process. That's basically what it is. Most of our behaviors are automatic. Research suggests that about 40% of our daily actions are habits, not conscious decisions. You actually reach for your phone without thinking too much about it. It's that innate and built into you at this point. You open Instagram on autopilot, you check your emails reflexively. You're not actually thinking about it consciously if you really sit down and think about all these things. So during your focus periods, practice catching yourself about. Notice when you reach for your phone, what triggered it? Boredom, anxiety perhaps? Was it a genuine need? Then when you want to check social media, pause for 5 seconds and ask yourself, is this what I actually want to do right now? Or is it just succumbing to some sort of a habit? Practice what mindful researchers call urge surfing, observing the urge to distract yourself without acting on it. I mean, this isn't about judgment or guilt, it's about creating an awareness. As Viktor Frankl wrote, between stimulus and response, there is an actual space. In that space is our power to make decisions and choose our responses. The more you practice this awareness, the more control you gain over your attention span. You're training what Cal Newport calls your concentration muscle, if you will. Catching yourself in the act can actually be very beneficial to you. Moving through your timeline with intention is harder than one thinks, given the current age of distractions we actually live in. If you want my personal 5-step intentionality audit, the framework I personally use to catch myself on autopilot, let me know down in the comments and I'll make that the next video. But the core principle without actually gatekeeping remains. As Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. He was talking about ethics, but it honestly applies also to your attention. An unexamined scroll is actually your stolen hour. Bringing us to step 5, use sprints, not marathons. Here's the important part. Forget permanent abstinence. You actually don't need it, and it's not sustainable. I don't care what other people tell you, but it's definitely not sustainable. What you need are focused sprints, periods of reduced stimulation and deep work, followed by normal life. That's all you need to aim for. That's also what's practical. Think of all this like interval training for your attention. During a sprint, 1 to 7 days perhaps, significantly reduce easy dopamine sources, engage in extended periods of deep work. Practice these steps a lot more intentionally. Between sprints, return to normal use of technology and entertainment. Just be yourself, be free, just be cognizant of it, right? Maintain awareness without strict rules. Start picking up or noticing what you learned about your own habits. Research on willpower by psychologist Roy Baumeister suggests that self-control is like a muscle. It can be strengthened through practice, but also fatigue. Short, intense periods of discipline are more effective than trying to maintain productivity or perfect control indefinitely. Cal Newport himself doesn't advocate for permanent abandoning of all entertainment or social media. I know I keep bringing up Cal Newport a lot. That's also because I read his book on deep work recently. You should check it out too. And he advocates for being intentional about when and how you use them. The goal isn't really about becoming a productivity robot of sorts, but it's really to ensure that when you do need that focus, you're able to deliver without second guessing or doubting yourself. Basically, when you have important work to do, you also show and have the capacity to do it deeply and perfectly and with finesse. And if you still don't believe me, think of it like fasting. I can challenge you, nobody advocates for starvation, but periodic fasting has significant benefits to your body. Same principle applies here, I guess. Periodic attention fasting to reset your baseline, not permanent deprivation. Two different things entirely. So sit back, think of how you want to pace yourself and not think about doing this over an extended period of time. You don't need to do it for an extended period of time if you're able to achieve the same amount of work in a shorter duration of time. So let's recap. We've covered what dopamine actually does, why modern life overstimulates our reward systems, and a 5-step protocol to reset your focus through environment engineering, clarifying your priorities, rewarding deep work, living consciously and conscientiously, and using strategic sprint cycles rather than permanent abstinence. The science is absolutely, unquestionably clear on this. Your ability to focus isn't actually fixed. Your motivation systems can be reconditioned, but it requires intentional practice. Here is my open-ended challenge to you. Try a 3-day sprint this week. Not next Monday, not next Thursday, tomorrow. Start a 3-day sprint starting tomorrow, or perhaps day after. You need some time to plan, I get it. But pick one high-value project, engineer your environment, and see what actually happens when you give yourself the space for deep work. The kind of output you're able to achieve is quite ineffable, really. You might be really surprised by what you're capable of when you're not constantly distracted. If this was helpful, leave a comment about what project you're going to tackle during your first sprint. If you want more content on building deep focus and meaningful productivity, subscribe and hit that notification bell icon. Until next time, now get off YouTube and go do something that matters, unless you're watching another video of mine. Until next time, folks.